discussion on the latest, what's been going on, the ongoing saga with the Oakland Raiders and their issues with whatever stadium they're going, wherever they're going to end up, and what's going to happen down the road. I'm Steve Dempsey with the Bay Area News Group, and joining us today is Oakland City reporter for the Bay Area News Group, Matt Artz. Welcome, Matt.
Hello.
And also joining us is Andy Dolich. He's a sports business consultant who's worked for more franchises than I care to mention right now, but that does include the Warriors, the A's, and the 49ers. So, welcome, Andy.
Thank you. Hi, Steve. Hi, Matt. And hello to all our viewers and our armed forces around the world.
Don't we hope? Don't we hope? Okay, well, for the moment, the Los Angeles option is behind the Raiders, but still plenty is going on concerning where the team is going to play for 2016 and beyond. Matt, what's the situation as it stands for the Raiders and the Coliseum Authority trying to put together at least a one-year lease for the upcoming season?
The Coliseum Authority actually met today to further discuss a lease extension. It shouldn't be difficult to do. The Raiders have had signed one-year lease extensions for each of the last two seasons, and the terms have been essentially the same. The team's been paying a little bit under $1 million for the stadium and its training complex. The last agreement signed around this time last year also gave them a little bit more concessions revenue and some opportunities to sell more advertising. That's always a tricky issue because the A's control concessions and signage at O.co. But because the terms have been pretty much the same the last couple of years, I don't think there's any reason to think that they're going to reinvent the wheel here. And I don't think a one-year extension would be very difficult to accomplish.
But it does seem like it's taking a little bit of time. I mean, is this just typical of a negotiation like this?
Last year, I think they finally agreed in March, and it got a little testy, and the Raiders even withheld rent at one point. And when it came down to it, the agreement was almost identical to the one they had before, except for those advertising concessions. So I don't think there's any reason to think that when it come down to it, the one-year lease will look any different than the way it currently looks.
Okay. Well, Andy, do you think that at least for the present time, this is the right option for the Raiders to sign a lease and at least play in Oakland for 2016, since right now it doesn't really look like a whole bunch of options out there?
Clearly, the NFL owners' vote in Houston was there is a there, and you're going back there. So where else are you going to play? I know we'll get into all the various options that have come to the fore previously and after the Houston vote. I agree with Matt. It should be relatively simple to get this exchange. I would find it incredibly intriguing if the mayor and the JPA said anything short of a 3 or 5 year lease extension is off the table. You go figure out where you're going to play, because they don't have a lease in any other location in North America that I'm aware of. And we're still in a situation where the Raiders are playing checkers and everybody else, specifically the NFL, is playing four-dimensional chess. I've added another dimension to this. And so I think for the Raider Nation, buy your tickets for kickoff at the O.co this season.
Okay, well, that's good news, at least temporarily speaking. Since the owners' vote, I mean, what's been going on over the last couple of weeks with Oakland and the Raiders, if anything?
There have not been stadium negotiations between the city and the Raiders. I don't think that's going to start up again for a little bit. I think the focus now is the lease extension. The biggest thing to happen since the owners' meeting is that the San Diego Chargers have decided to try to get a stadium built, or at least financing approved, in San Diego. And that could set the stage for Los Angeles being in play for the Raiders again. And so I think both San Diego and the Chargers have some incentives to try to get a financing plan before voters in November. And if they do that and if voters approve it, then LA opens up to the Raiders again, and that's a real option. And if not, then we're looking at Oakland again, or other possible scenarios. But I think one scenario that would be very unlikely then would be the Raiders going to San Diego, because if San Diego doesn't want to pay $350, $400 million for their own team, it's hard to imagine that they're going to want to do it for somebody else's team.
Got a viewer question here that kind of ties into that a little bit about the Raiders and maybe opening up some dialogue here. Do you think the Raiders are showing good faith here, or are they acting like scorned children? I'll open up to both of you.
I do not believe good or faith is a word to be used in this. Mark Davis, as the owner of the team, has talked about having a Raider-only stadium. He's shown that he wants to stay in Oakland, yet he's hopping on planes, dropping into cities all over the country. He's willing to share stadiums hundreds of miles away when his father and he have spurned an option to move 40 miles away and play in Levi's. The look on his face when the 32 vote negative came in Houston looked like he took one in the gut, and talked about the Raiders relocating anywhere in the world, North America or other parts, not mentioning Oakland at all. I happen to believe pretty strongly that the NFL playbook on this was perfectly played. They wanted the Raiders back in Oakland, and I believe ultimately, I have no scientific or insider evidence to know this, the Raiders have three options: go to Levi's, remodel the existing O.co, and that brings in the A's circumstance, which we'll talk about in a bit, or sell majority ownership. Neither of those options, and there's three, I believe the Raiders are willing to embrace, and therefore, to me, they're Team Bedouin. From year to year, they're going to be in a lease situation, and the circumstance of all these other markets is not what the NFL wants. It's not what those owners want. That was a 30-2 vote. That was kind of like the political hits of last night to all the other presidential candidates. That was a clear vote. We do not want you as part of this club. Sell the team to somebody that gives us more options.
I talked to Eric Grubman, who kind of shepherded the whole Los Angeles stadium process for the NFL, and I talked to him on Friday when he was in town for the Super Bowl. And one thing that kind of surprised me a little bit is I asked him, if the Chargers build a stadium in San Diego, can the Raiders really just exercise this option, lickety split and be that second team? And he essentially said yes. He said that as long as they reach an agreement with the Rams for Inglewood, that is kind of what was discussed at the owners' meeting, at either a partnership or a landlord-tenant situation, that it would just require a simple vote of the owners, and that it would be essentially ministerial, that they wouldn't have to make the case of why they would need to leave, that it would be pretty much a done deal, which was surprising to some degree, but that's what he said. He said that if the Chargers stay in San Diego, that the Raiders really could exercise that option relatively easily.
I would find that, I agree with Matt, that would be a bit surprising, and I don't know whether Mr. Grubman used that exact term that Matt just said, a simple vote of the owner. That's oxymoronic. There is not a simple vote of the owners, in my view, and that just a check mark, yes, the Raiders can come and share with Stan Kroenke at what is being built or what will be built in Inglewood, is the rub. I do not believe the league wants three teams in LA. They would much prefer to have the Chargers play in Inglewood, but the Chargers do have an option, and there is fairly significant money. Matt, you know better than I, but there's fairly significant money on the table from San Diego to build the stadium, but the Spanos family has decided that it's not enough money. But I believe the league's position, they're not going to say it, they shouldn't say it, is to have the Rams, to have the Chargers only in Inglewood and not to have the Raiders play in Southern California, in either Inglewood or San Diego.
I think the league wants the map to look as close to what it looks like today, which means I think the league would like the Chargers in a new stadium in San Diego, and they would prefer the Raiders stay in the Bay Area. But the Raiders do, on paper, have this option that they can exercise for Los Angeles potentially.
Well, speaking on that, we're getting a decent amount of viewer questions here. One from OC Raiders fan. That should tell us something there. The LA Raiders would be huge, and the Rams don't want that. We would dominate the LA market and beyond. What do you think about that? If the Raiders went down there,
I would say look at history and stop talking about fantasy. When the Raiders left the LA Coliseum, they had 18,000 season ticket holders. That domination, a lot of that is a Raider notion and not a Raider nation. And how much would seat licenses cost if that was the way to go? Clearly the Raiders have an incredible amount of emotion and energy, Raider fans in that team, but you can't do anything other than look at 18,000 season ticket holders in the Coliseum and say that does not equal domination.
If you look at the Raiders' attendance at the Coliseum, especially those last 4 years, unless they were playing the Cowboys or some other team that drew a lot of fans, they were averaging 40 to 50,000 per season, and the only time they were getting close to filling the Coliseum was basically when there was an attractive road team.
well, okay.
And the Raiders, Matt, help me out here. I believe the Raiders play in the smallest capacity stadium in the current NFL, and the upper deck is tarped in their home market.
Correct.
Okay, well, I have another question here from, and hopefully I'll pronounce it correctly, Shaming Williams, saying if Mark Davis can find his own investor or developer for a stadium in Oakland without demanding free land, this could become a dead issue. He has been able to go everywhere else or hire people to work out agreements, but he never does anything in Oakland. Your thoughts on that?
The tricky thing as far as using development rights to build a new O.co stadium is that Mark Davis wants to preserve as much of the land as possible for parking and tailgating, and that would make any such project less enticing to a developer who would want more land, to build whatever they're going to build, whether it's office or a hotel or homes. And so that's a conflict that hasn't been resolved yet, and that's still one of the issues that's out there.
Steve, can I use a visual for my response?
Yeah, make it clean though.
Okay, it's clean. It's a green poker chip. I don't know if you can see this.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. So this doesn't just play to the Las Vegas visits, Mark talking to Sheldon Adelson, but it does talk about the Oakland A's, who are green. And with any inference about what is going to be done at 66th Avenue, notice how quiet the A's have actually been in all of this, which isn't necessarily their position in the past, because whatever conversations are going on behind closed doors between the city, the county, the JPA, and the A's, that will definitely affect significantly the Raiders' ability to do anything at the Coliseum site. And again, you do the math, 81 baseball games versus 10 football games.
Okay. I have another viewer question from Paul. Where are the Mark Davis Oakland renderings, and where is the Fisher Wolf Oakland renderings?
I know the answer to that. I've been through 45 years of ballpark, stadium, and arena renderings. They're at the Renderings Hall of Fame in Flint, Michigan. No, seriously, I think that is a very valid question. We hear all of these other locations. Now, the A's have shown, their stadium, Cisco Field in Fremont. They have shown renderings that I think have been printed and are public about what they would like their ballpark to look like. And I actually think, as part of Coliseum City and all that, there have been, remember Floyd Kephart? There have been renderings there. I'm not exactly sure what the latest renderings are for the Raiders football-only stadium on the Coliseum site. Good question.
They're not out there. Supposedly they exist. Ignacio de la Fuente, a former Oakland City Council person, said he once visited the Raiders and saw renderings, but if they do exist, they certainly haven't been released.
Okay. Well, Paul also asked, and I think this is tongue-in-cheek, Stan Kroenke just bought 500,000 acres in Texas. Can he build a stadium there for Mark Davis?
Only if Jerry Jones lets.
There you go. Now, I have another question coming up here. That's okay. Okay. Now, this is from Dave Martin. If certain criteria is met with the Chargers' negotiations in San Diego, they could extend their agreement with the Rams into January 2018 and effectively squat on both the Los Angeles and San Diego markets even longer. By the way, I completely agree with Andy on his option for the Raiders, other than the remodel. NFL is not interested in renovation, and neither are the Raiders. Thoughts on that?
As far as San Diego, he's absolutely right. I think not only are the Raiders likely to play in Oakland this year, but they're probably almost certain to play in Oakland next year too. And it's exactly the point that that person raised, is that if there is a ballot measure and it passes, what the Chargers can do is take another year to decide whether it all makes sense for them to do, and that's because any stadium proposal could end up being sued on environmental grounds. And so why they can extend it to 2018 is so they can fight any kind of lawsuit on environmental grounds. So if the Chargers do get this thing passed, it really becomes a 2-year process instead of just a 1-year process. And if they don't get it passed and they move to LA for 2017, the Raiders will still it would be still a very short window for the Raiders to actually leave Oakland for the following season. So it's pretty safe to assume the Raiders are here for at least 2 more years. What was the other part of that question?
Bear with us here for a second.
I think it was just to find a way. I completely agree with you.
Okay. All right. So, Matt, it seems to me though that San Antonio continues to be a part of this. I mean, they kind of come, but they just don't go away. I mean, is what they're offering the Raiders, viable?
They haven't truly offered the Raiders anything at this point. I mean, outside of Los Angeles, the Raiders don't have a real, gold medal option to go to. San Antonio has the potential of helping to pay for a stadium, but you're now a planes ride from all of your fans. You're in the middle of Cowboys country, and you have the question as to whether 2 powerful owners in Texas would even allow a 3rd team there. San Diego, as we mentioned before, if they're not, that requires public funding, and if they're not going to do it for the Chargers, why would they do it for the Raiders? Las Vegas has the issue, of gambling. So there's no perfect destination for the Raiders at this point, unless Los Angeles opens back up for them, and even that, there still could be question marks. So, I think the Raiders are going to, and the NFL as well, will try to make it appear that the Raiders have lots of good options and that they're in a strong position, but they don't have a lot of good options, and including Oakland. still, at a stalemate.
Now, Roger Goodell came out.
Sorry about that.
Yes, we can hear you.
There for a bit. Sorry.
That's okay. And you can hear us, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Roger Goodell came out a little while ago and said that if it were up to the owners, if the owners said okay, he's okay with the Raiders moving to Las Vegas. To me, it seems like it's hard to imagine any professional sports franchise in Las Vegas. I mean, they're putting up a great deal and all that. I mean, is there an inkling that the Raiders could play in Las Vegas, and from what you guys can see?
Well, let me just jump on that one. When I was with the Vancouver Grizzlies, we spent a fair amount of time, effort, and money looking at Las Vegas. Now, David Stern, who was commissioner at that time in the NBA, said that is never going to happen as long as I'm commissioner. My owner, the late Mike Heisley, said, that's fine, I'm going to pursue this. And essentially taking games off the betting board never got us past square one. In terms of Roger Goodell saying, if the ownership approved this, I wouldn't stand in the way. Again, that's a very, very large if. And with the major issue that is right in the NFL's face in terms of CTE, concussion injuries and all that, for the NFL to take on this issue right now, moving a franchise to Las Vegas, and the Raiders, one of the lowest net worth ownerships in all of football, to Las Vegas, I think is as much chance of Matt and you and I winning the next Powerball for $2 billion.
Well, I got another viewer question here. What gets the Raiders back to the table and serious about trying to complete a new stadium deal in Oakland?
I mean, I'm sure there'll be negotiations again. In some ways, we're in a very similar position to where we were this time last year, where LA is still floating out there for the Raiders. And I think to some degree, what the Raiders do will be predicated on what happens in San Diego and whether they are able to get a stadium initiative on the ballot and how that goes. If that fizzles and it's clear that the Chargers are going to Los Angeles, I think there is more incentive for the Raiders to try to get something to work in Oakland. If not, you're in a similar situation where I think the Raiders probably believe that they can get to Los Angeles and that it would be a lot easier for them to become Stan Kroenke's tenant in Inglewood than it would be to try to figure out how to finance a stadium in Oakland.
I believe pretty strongly that there will never be another up-from-the-ground billion-dollar football stadium built in Northern California. But that's just my view. The league is not going to say no to that. Clearly, there is not funding either from ownership of the Raiders nor the city and the county to do that. And I actually think the Raiders have an excellent opportunity here to break this logjam. And that logjam, whether they believe it or not, if they completely rule out Los Angeles or going to Levi's, would be to say, we're going to take that $500 million, which Mark Davis talks about all the time, that we have $500 million to put into a stadium, and literally push the remodel concept so that it forces the A's hand. Right now, the A's hand is sitting in their lap not to do anything. Somebody needs to force the A's hand in this complex negotiation, and the Raiders are the ones to do it. The city and the county won't. But if Mark keeps talking about playing in any other city in the country and flitting around, that'll never get done. And you could probably buy season tickets to both the A's and the Raiders in 2017 and 2018, which is good for fans of both teams, and they'll still be sharing the O.co.
Okay, so you two think that Levi's Stadium is not a possibility at this point?
I don't think the NFL will force Mark Davis to move to Levi's if he doesn't want to. I mean, think about it. He's Mark Davis is basically saying he's willing to pay $550 million to share a stadium in Los Angeles rather than share Levi's in Santa Clara. And he's given reasons such as ingress and egress and parking spaces for tailgating. And I'm sure there's also just that sense that it would cement him as the second team in the region to be playing in 49er Stadium. And I was there for the Super Bowl, and it is drenched with 49erness. I was on Vista Montana Way, and then I was on Eddie DeBartolo Way, and I mean I can see to some degree why Mark Davis wouldn't want to become a tenant there, but at the same time, his options certainly are limited.
Well, I have.
Yeah, I'd like. It'll never come from us, but I'd like the $500 million really defined. Where is that $500 million? How much of it is net cash? In terms of two teams in one stadium in metropolitan areas, it's what the NFL's technology. I agree with Matt. I mean, it is not branded at Levi's, no doubt. Can it be changed to a certain extent on the Sundays thing there? Yes. But there's no interest on the Raiders side. So that probably doesn't happen. But their options are limited, even though Mark believes, and he would know, that their options are multiple. And if they were multiple, he wouldn't be negotiating a one-year lease at the Coliseum.
Yeah, because I have a reader question that kind of goes along with that from you'll remember, saying how would Mark Davis afford the $500 million project, and you just...
It would be paid over time. I forget the exact, I think it's paid over 10 or 11 years, so it's installments. I think when you factor in all the installments, it actually turns out to be more than $550 million. It is an installment plan. But I mean, it's the annual installment would cost less than a Derek Carr on a second contract. So it's not that much.
Okay, a question from Joseph. Where are we in the county land sale to the city of Oakland?
We are in the middle of it, and they say that maybe by April there could be some sort of agreement, at least to pay off the bonds up front. That still doesn't necessarily solve anything. The idea of paying off the bonds on the stadium is that you could tear it down, but as we mentioned before, you can't really tear it down if the Oakland A's are playing there. So you could maybe, entice a developer and say, hey, there's nothing forcing us to keep this giant building up, except for the fact that there actually is, and that's the Oakland A's. So negotiations are still going on, and they're hoping that by the spring there will be some sort of agreement there.
Okay, Ben asks, it seems like the A's need to commit to downtown Oakland first before we see any real progress with the Raiders at O.Co. Coliseum. What do you think about that? I'll throw it out to both of you.
I'll let Matt go first since he's right in the middle of this.
I just think with the A's and the Raiders, they both are acting as if there can only be one team there, and they each want the other one to be the team. Lou Wolf has said repeatedly that he thinks the Coliseum site is the best site. Now John Fisher is taking a look at it, and we'll see if he reaches the same conclusion. And we have to see whether they want to invest in Oakland at all. And I think that's still an open question as to whether this ownership group is willing to, pay $650 million to have a new stadium here. So it just remains uncertain. There is no perfect site for the A's downtown. And Howard Terminal is bandied about because it's publicly owned and it's 50 acres. But there's a certain irony there because you're moving closer to the downtown, but you actually have poorer transportation connections than you would at the Coliseum site. So it's definitely, there are reasons why the A's haven't jumped at Howard Terminal. So it's still really unclear where the A's truly want to be and whether they want to build a stadium in Oakland or not.
You know, good, bad, and indifferent, there's only one location in North America that's housing 3 major professional sports teams, and one now that's undergoing one of the most magical runs in the history of the sport. And they'll be playing on that site for several more years until their circumstances are legally released to build their Mission Bay Arena. They moved it back a year to 2019. The Raiders and the A's have proven historically that they can generate significant fans. Nobody is arguing that the O.co is outmoded and has been for more than a decade. Downtown, where's the money coming from for the infrastructure improvements in downtown? The city doesn't have that money. The county doesn't have that money. You're not going to get any assistance from the state. And the Coliseum site is workable. The whole scenario of I need more space for tailgating is completely specious in my mind, because if you look at some of the current regulations and future regulations about gas guzzling SUVs in parking lots, that in and itself is going to be a problem. And when you look at BART, you look at the road system, you look at the airport connector, it's right there in Oakland. And all of these other sites are Trojan horses, wastes of time. The strategy for both the A's and the Raiders is to share the Coliseum site after the Warriors leave, cut through the crap that has existed here for 10 years, and do a deal and benefit some of the most loyal fans in the history of the sport in Oakland.
Okay. Omar asked, there's a huge Brooklyn Basin development project that is currently selling land south of Jack London. Have the Raiders toured or thought about developing there?
I think for the Raiders, the only site in the Bay Area that makes sense is the Coliseum site, because of the access to BART and because it's already established, as a sports site. Brooklyn Basin, one section of it was on the list of possible sites for the A's, and you have the same types of issues that you have with Howard Terminal, in that, yes, it's closer to downtown, but it's still a mile from BART, so you're farther from BART. The freeway access isn't as good. The ingress and egress isn't as good, and it's really segmented, as a lot of kind of the area west of 880 is from the city. You're basically sticking a stadium in an industrial zone. So that area has been talked about for the A's, but it's hard to see how that would really be attractive to them.
And Joseph asked, I'm sorry, I had to crack up on this one. Why not kick out the A's and the Raiders and build a palace for the Warriors? What do you guys think about that?
The Warriors,
unfortunately, that ship has sailed, and we've talked about this before, and I think it's a bit sad, and I don't mean to just cast this on former Mayor Gene Kwan, but if you remember, there was a 2-year hiatus after the Warriors announced that they were going to be playing by the 2017 season at a massively beautiful complex at Piers 30 and 32 in San Francisco. And in that gap of time, that 2 years, there were no significant negotiations that I'm aware of to do just that in that solution. To have the Warriors, who, if there's any team that doesn't need to move based upon fan support, it's the Warriors. But that arena is going to happen. Putting that genie back in the bottle is just wishful thinking, and the focus and strategy and the people involved here literally need to lock themselves in a room and not get out until they figure it out, and that hasn't happened. And whether it's Brooklyn or Howard or Vegas or San Antonio, it's all of hot air, and the ability to stay in Oakland is real. It's here. It can happen, but the parties cannot agree on being a team, and that's what it takes to be a team and really benefit Oakland, which has benefited them for decades.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap up. We've got one more viewer question. Actually, I've been sitting on for a while here, from Dinosaur Face. And Andy, I understand that the Raiders should do this, and they should stay in Oakland, and all that. But I mean, let's get down to what's real here. And do you guys realistically see the Raiders being able to stay in Oakland? And if not, where do they end up?
I still think LA is a possibility if the Chargers stay in San Diego after talking to the NFL about that. I think they're going to be in the Bay Area or Los Angeles, and really no other options than those.
I believe the Raiders will end up where the league tells them they should end up. They'll get an envelope, they'll get a phone call, this is where you're going. And it's not going to be where the Raiders want to be, it's going to be where the NFL wants them to be. And I just think about Mark coming out of the press conference in Houston and congratulating Stan Kroenke and the mayor of Inglewood. Would Al Davis have stepped to the mic and congratulated anybody about being beaten up 30-2? I don't think so. I don't think that would have happened. The best place for the Raiders is right where they are. Could they be in another market? They could. They will only be there if that is to the benefit of the other 31 owners in the NFL.
Okay. Well, we'll wrap this up. Andy Dolich, thank you very much for participating. Matt Artz, same to you. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
And that will do it for our broadcast. I'm Steve Dempsey. Thank you very much.
Bye, Andy.